The Canadian border open to all Americans now. The restrictions were lifted for the first time since the early days of the pandemic. BNC correspondent Stephanie Bertini, she's at the border with what this means for Americans there and across the country.
It's been more than a year since the pandemic brought on the closure of the Canadian border. For American Alfonso Jones, who lives in the border city of Detroit, it impacted his family life.
I spent from October 2020 till June of 2021 without seeing my kids.
Jones co-parents his kids with their Canadian mother, who lives in Windsor, the city just across the Detroit border. It's just a short drive through the tunnel that connects the U.S. to Canada, but as the pandemic set in, that drive became impossible.
Well, they were letting us across at the border agent's discretion. So I got a couple that sent me back, and they told me that if I did it again, I would be banned from the country.
A tough spot for any single parent to be in.
I found myself trying to make a decision on whether I wanted to just give up my stuff here and then try to go to live in Canada, even though I don't have any way to support myself in Canada. I don't have a work permit or anything like that to live in Canada.
Throughout the pandemic, Canadian travel restrictions, quarantine requirements, and overall protocols generally considered much more intense than restrictions we have seen in the United States. Common knowledge in a border city like this, says Shranda Battle.
They are much more rigid in their practices and the things that they are putting into place.
And this is well known.
It's well known, absolutely.
The Canadian government citing low COVID cases and a high overall vaccination rate as reasons to move in this direction, a direction people on both sides all along the U.S.-Canadian border have been pushing for, including Congressman Brian Higgins, whose area includes Buffalo, New York, where businesses have long been reliant on the flow of people who cross back and forth and spend money doing it. In a statement to BNC, the congressman said the reopening of the Canadian border to Americans is a step in the right direction after 16 months of restrictions which kept families apart, prevented people from accessing property, and closed off the cross-border exchange that feeds local economies. But Higgins and others are still critical of the situation, including a lack of reciprocal action from the Biden administration. For now, the U.S. land border remains closed to Canadians.
We both have our set of rules and regulations on each side, so, they have theirs and we have ours.
While Customs and Border Protection isn't allowing Canadians to cross by land, a loophole by air, the U.S. has allowed Canadian travelers to fly in all throughout the pandemic. And now that means vaccinated or not. All the rules and regulations can be frustrating, says this couple, Jenna and Marcus Blythers.
Canada's right there. And I was like, but we can't go there unless we're vaccinated.
Even though the Canadian border is open now, to visit, Americans must be fully vaccinated and show proof, must provide a negative COVID-19 test, and must input required information in an app which allows the Canadian government to track all visitors and travelers in the pandemic.
There's still hoops that we have to jump through, so it's kind of like we're still at the same point. So it feels like we're moving forward, but at a standstill at the same time.
So for people like Alfonso Jones, it feels like there is still much farther to go, and so much that can't be undone. To make up for the time he lost with his kids earlier in the pandemic, they came down to Detroit for the summer, but they've been missing Mom. So because he can now drive them across the border back to Mom, he will this week. But at least for now, their mom can't drive them back to him. Not until the United States makes land border revisions too. Frustrating, confusing, and as you can see, downright life-altering for some. I'm reporting at the Detroit-Windsor Tunnel. I'm Stephanie Bertini for BNC.